in my wildest dreams, often wondered what it would be like to be the moderator of my own 15-minute session. In 45 minutes, we'll probably find out. No, I want to share with you my own report from the front lines of sustainability in science, policy, and architecture. And I'm just going to take 3 bites at that and give you good news, bad news, and some outlook in each of those components. And so let's kick off with science. Now, why we want to talk about science is relatively straightforward. We need facts to know the state of the environment. It's not simply a moral question of what people may want or not want, and that's pretty crucial. Now, the good news, and there is some pretty profound good news from the scientific side of environmental sustainability. The good news in 2015 is that we know what the bad news is. I mean, the reality is now we have enough data in at enough resolution to say, yep, here's the problem with water, here's the problem with climate, here's the problem with resources. And increasingly, there's consensus around that. So this diagram you'll be seeing a lot more of in the coming decade, because essentially the science conversation on sustainability is stabilizing around this, which is called the Planetary boundaries model, pioneered and developed by a bunch of guys in Stockholm, no less. But it's not just that it comes from Stockholm, it is actually the model that there is a convergence around to discuss the science base of the environmental crisis. And so what's going on here is confrontation of the data, and that's a good thing. Now, the problem is this. We don't know what to do about that problem, the problem of resource limits. And I don't mean we don't have good ideas, because we've heard a bunch of good ideas. What we really don't know, we're talking science here, is what is the scientific way to confront resource limits? That's a fascinating question. Now, my experience of this was based in my work at the United Nations. I wrote for the UN Environment Programme their framework policy on sustainable urban lifestyles. And to do that, you have to analyze consumption patterns, both resource and consumer behavior patterns. And what I discovered is there's very, very weak science in defining what consumption is and how it really works, how it really translates material transformation to value. And so I went away from the UN and started researching that on a PhD program with Tim Jackson at the Department of Engineering in Surrey, at the boundary of engineering, resource flows, and economics. And I had an amazing scientific breakthrough after 2 or 3 years. The breakthrough was, this is freaking hard. It's very hard to understand how resources translate into value. But if we don't know how that works, we won't truly ever have an answer to the problem of limited resources, a finite planet, and, in principle, unlimited interests for human potential and development. And so, just as a kind of full stop on the report of what's next on the science side, what's basically next is resource-based economics. We have to get there somehow, and there's been efforts in the last half century, essentially, to get us there, but we have to do them better. And I want to see, in Pittsburgh, Carnegie Mellon become leaders in analytical, computer-based economics, because it's time we started using real data and massive computation rather than slightly fictitious models that economists think of on their coffee breaks. The opportunity to create science-based economics is with us, partly because of computation. Just going to share this diagram with you. This is what's called a Sankey diagram. And if you've never seen one, you should start enjoying them. This is a model of how resources flow through any system, whether it's a city or a nation. And this is what we're going to have to start seeing in our national accounts. Where are the resources going, and how are they being translated to value? Because if we don't do that, we are not responding to environmental limits in a scientific way. This is what I'm excited about on the science conversation. We know the limits. We're trying to get to grips with true analytical solutions, and we'll see what happens. Carnegie Mellon, get the computers spinning up on resource-based economics, please. So standards, policymakers, decision makers, the non-commercial world, the world of conversations about important things, often lands on standards as a way to define progress towards a social good of whatever sort. And so that's where a lot of sustainability has ended up, a conversation around standards. And there is good news in the conversation on standards. The good news on standards starts with this, is there are more and more standards that make sense. They define sustainability in a useful way, they're technically credible, they speak to a specific community, and those standards themselves are becoming standard. There's a sense in which they become universal to a specific conversation and a specific community. Good news. And obviously you will recognize in Pittsburgh LEED as one of those standards that has some standardized character, PNC Bank ought to be called out for being very strong in leading on LEED and environmental sustainability in their buildings. They've pioneered that. But there is bad news, and the bad news on standards is this: the standards are not high enough. If you take all LEED buildings across all categories of LEED certification, you have approximately between 5% and 10% energy efficiency increment. For all the razzmatazz of LEED, that's not a lot, and it's nothing close to the 50, 60, 70 net zero numbers that Hal talks about and the sustainability data requires that we reach towards. So something's not quite working there, and one of the things that's not working, it's just too expensive. To do a LEED certification adds quite a significant premium in the design process and the capital build, and doesn't necessarily come back, pay back over the life of the building. The standards aren't high enough, it costs too much. And one of the reasons why that all gets stuck, why we have those problems, is actually standards don't create value. They're not valuable enough in and of themselves. And so if you take LEED and look at it in the round, yes, it stabilizes the conversation on sustainability in the architecture and the urban profession. But I would say it stabilizes at the wrong level. The aspiration is set too low, and the expectation of absorbing costs is out there and leads to comparatively slow uptake of really ambitious projects. So it's not surprising that we need to look beyond that. And so what I find interesting about coming to know Andre is that what he and the Heinz guys have done in town is trying to look for what's next in sustainability. And I have a sense that one of the reasons why P4 has come to be is a hunger for going beyond LEED, a hunger for finding what's next in the mix. If we talk about standards and the debate on sustainability, in particular in architecture, we have to find standards that are better and add value, but don't cost anything. They have to deliver value, deliver quality, but not cost anything. And how would we do that? Probably through something much more rich than a checklist, something that looks like a design methodology, not just an engineering checklist. Now, you might recognize this logo. It's a thing called the Living Building Challenge. It's the logo of the Living Building Challenge. Now, the Living Building Challenge is not a checklist of how you do sustainable design. It's basically like a design philosophy. When you ponder the universe and come up with a bunch of principles, it'll look a bit like that. And you might think that that's all very esoteric and totally useless. In actual fact, the greenest building in Pittsburgh right now is certified to Living Building Challenge. It's the Phipps Conservatory it's the Center for Sustainable Landscapes up at the Phipps Conservatory. And when you go there, you discover a couple of things. It works in terms of resources. It also works in terms of being a great building. You walk in there and it feels good. Quality, value, limited premium on the capital spend, and a fantastic return over the lifetime. And so we need to go richer, go more deeply into what standards are trying to accomplish by looking at the dynamics of each industry. And in this case, we're talking about architecture. One of my colleagues and clients in Stockholm, I've worked with over many years now, but in the last 3 years, we've been working on not just an abstract methodology that the industry tells us to use. We built a methodology from the ground up based on sustainability best practice and integrated it into their office methodology. They're a medium-sized office. They've taken 3 years. We worked together to create one methodology for how they do design, not a green thing on top of their old thing. This is it, and they're rebooting that pretty much here at P4. So I'm delighted to see that what I've been saying to the industry as an architect and environmental scientist in the last few years is starting to break through. Standards are good, but they're not good enough. They'll cost you, and they won't add value. Let's find a way to take it deeper. So this is what I want to share with you as my parting shot and the exciting frontier that I think I'm part of and I'm enjoying contributing to, and I want Pittsburgh to lead in relation to sustainability and the built environment. There is a new paradigm, I have to use that word at least once today, of built design, where sustainability is baked in. Doesn't look like green stuff, doesn't look like moralism. The environmental side, environmentalism is all gone. It's built on hardcore analysis and the front end of what happens in design. And let me share 4 themes with you, which I think are pretty comprehensive as to what is necessary to lead in the new sustainable built design. I want to share with you first the bad news on sustainable urbanism, the prospects for sustainable urbanism. And the bad news is this: cities are enormous things. physically, they consume 60 to 70% of all resources of the human civilization. And they are complex, large entities that are the epicenters of resource consumption. Not only that, the worst thing about them is they're dumb. They don't, they are inherently passive and sit there and allow resources to be consumed in the system. And when we look at urbanization, for example, in the Far East, there's lots of exciting examples. Hal gave us some of what's happening in China, but there's tens of thousands of examples that are not exciting. The scale of urbanization, which does not have a new strategy for sustainable built environment baked into it, is vast. And it's very depressing when you look at the statistics there. But the flip side is very interesting. Cities are massive, and that's a good thing. They become coherent targets for manipulation, for management of resources all in one go. If we need to deal with human resource consumption at scale rapidly and have some hope of doing it, cities are sufficiently big for us to make large interventions at scale that are credible. And to some extent, because of that scale issue, they are responsive. Physically, they're passive. Institutionally, they're responsive in ways that nation states are not. Here's an example, P4. This would be incoherent at the national level. You couldn't have these people and these voices in the room and expect to get something done. It'd be a free-for-all. And so what's exciting is to see exactly the promise of a city. It's a big, complex problem. There's lots of resources being consumed here. But it's sufficiently optimized at scale. That is the nature of a city. It is optimized at scale to be a vehicle for response. And I think these two guys are helping to really lead this forward. They have a muse whispering in their shoulder, and I think he'll be very influential in the coming years. But responsiveness is crucial. You have to work at scales that matter. Cities are big enough to cause damage. They're also small enough to be the places where you can achieve massive change. So what's next? And this is where I jump to in my enthusiasm. 4 themes to take us through what I think are the highlights and the key elements of truly sustainable built design. Data. We have to get the data, and we have to manipulate it correctly. We have to understand that demographics are transitioning. We have to understand what density is and how it works. And we have to understand we live in a technological age. And devices will be our friend, profoundly so. So let's have a quick look. Does anyone know what this is? You can call out when you have a little view. What is it? Ideas? Energy use? No. What? Twitter, no, but not bad. What this is SMS usage around the holiday times. That's Happy New Year, right? And the point is this, there's rich information all around us, but never in human history have we been able to capture it in real time at scale, let alone manipulate it and process it. And so when people talk about the cloud, pretty much forget everything, but know this. Everything that can be computed, will be computed, should be computed, and if you're not doing it, watch out. Mickey McManus will probably tell you something very similar. Everything that can be computed will be computed, and if you don't use it, don't get it, you don't use it, you're not in the game. There is no conversation on sustainability at the urban scale, let alone the global scale, unless we are saturated in interesting data. We've got to find it, we have to manipulate it, we have to study it, and then we have to deploy it. So here's an example of that in practice. Autodesk is the premium provider of design software to the architecture industry, and they keep on pumping out free stuff, which blows one's mind in its sophistication and blows the economic prospects of consulting companies that used to sell this stuff. This is a tool called Vasari that is a free tool for energy optimization at the architectural and urban scale. And it has real-world data built into it, operating in real time. Draw a model, position it, geoposition it, run the numbers via the cloud, and it will tell you how effective it is within seconds for free. That used to cost tens of thousands of dollars and take months of consultancy time. Data counts, and it's going to save us. So demographics is changing, and you can't design cities around old models of society. Airbnb is a fantastic example, not so much of the startup economy, but of the demographic transitions that will drive change at the urban scale. People are living in ways, people are living quality lives in ways nobody would have believed even 10 years ago. The idea of sharing your home, making a little money on the side, all this stuff is evolving in real time. And it's based on demographic transitions. Why that's the case, I don't know. but it is happening, and we have to confront that. We need to know what's next, and we can't assume that people want a two-car family or they want a garden. Let's see what they really want. Let's study the demographics, and let's exploit that. Now, when I was working with BIG, the Danish architects Krista Jesper mentioned, on one of the largest office buildings in Sweden in the last 6 months, the predominant subject matter of discussion was actually demographics. We had to design the largest office building for the technical, for the civil servants in Sweden. How do we do that? Actually, what we did is study what they want to do with their time. How do they work? How does the community relate to the building? Demographics was actually the driving force in the design. And that ended up being what led us to, we didn't win the competition, but we came second in the competition, built on demographic sophistication, rather than design genius, just studying what people want. This is a project I worked on with another Swedish company. This is Hyllie on the border of Malmö, which Krista was planning. What we responded to here was solving almost as many problems as possible through density: food consumption, transport, energy. We built an energy system, a food system, and a transport system based around where you position the buildings. When I was at the UN, I came in and we were talking about transport. Within a few years, we were talking about mobility. And then, of course, some magic happened. We started talking about access. You don't need vehicles to get access if you design dense. It's not rocket science, and that's what the Nordic region is really contributing to hugely in the design conversation. Density solves things. Don would be annoyed if I thought that the Nordics were the only people talking about density, because his urban colleagues are also pioneering that. Final point is this. I was also involved in the project team to redesign Kiruna, which is a city inside the Arctic Circle. We have to move the city center because it's collapsing. It's over a mine. Fascinating project. And it's infinitely complex in terms of urban requirements. Every possible thematic requirement, programmatic requirement is in there. But what actually came out was most interesting to me. Well, the opportunity, once you get to that scale of complexity, was this: get the devices in place. So I designed, in addition to the other urban interventions, an app, a lifestyle app that plugs into most of the components of your urban lifestyle. And that was based on my architecture diploma work. And I think that's going to I think I'm already contributing to some versions of that project, and I'd love to see that stuff happening here. Leverage your devices to achieve massive change at the urban scale. And so that's a little run through from my front line of the transition from sustainability as alarmism. Sustainability is punching 911, to sustainability as first response, to getting out there and seeing how we can contribute. Solving the problem of resource limits by adding value rather than adding cost. So that's my contribution. Hopefully it's useful. And then I'm just going to round up the planet session. What we've tried to do with this session, basically, is shift the conversation from where you might have thought we'd be going with a planet-themed session, which is the planet's in crisis, let's get to grips with that. But I think we are sufficiently to grips with the crisis itself, the data of resource limits and damage to the natural environment. And so where do we go from there? The thesis that I've tried to present to you through these speakers that we've presented is that what's happening now is, whether it's business development, whether it's energy strategy, whether it's urban development, or whether it's philanthropy and the leveraging role of foundations, that sustainability can be part of the engine of creating physical settlements at the large-scale cities, but also value in business and social terms. Krista was very specific about how his contribution to sustainability involves solving people's lifestyle problems at a very fine-grained level. Jesper was very specific about how using the resource engine, financial resource engine of the building sector in Denmark, they can create a virtuous circle whereby allocating money from their construction, from the successful private sector building industry, goes back to re-engineering a city that where those buildings people can thrive in those buildings, and the city itself is durable and worthwhile living in. Maria is excited about the potential of sustainability to be a driver of growth in Stockholm, and she's already on top of the industries that are post-industrial, post-resource intensive. She thinks that the coding industry she knows the coding industry is already an engine for development in Stockholm, and that's what's becoming the case here. And finally, Hal. Hal is in the thick of the transition right now. And as you can see from his 4 key themes, there's value to be extracted if you invest now and play the long game in looking for zero carbon, zero net energy solutions at the urban scale. So what I've tried to do is tilt the conversation from one of crisis to one of value creation. Hopefully this has been a useful session for you. Coffee's ready. We're not too far over the time. And I'm looking forward to the rest of the day and the rest of the event. Great. Thank you so much.